going on, guys? JD at JD's Custom Buggies. So I want to take a little bit of time and kind of go over the Mikuni VM26606. I get a lot of questions, people with their kits and whatnot, and I just want to clarify some things. I figured just the visual would be better. So I grabbed one out of stock here. I already took the float bowl screws out of it, and just want to give you an idea of, and give you a little tour of the carburetor and how to set some things, just the basics. Number one, take the float bowl off. All right. Now, when you order a kit from JD's Custom Buggies, whether it be the carb alone, or I'm sorry, a carb in any kit, whether it be the Earth Dog kit, whether it be just the basic GY6 kit, you get jets with it. It's going to come with a 15 pilot jet. The jets move in increments of 2.5. All right. So when you buy a carb, any Mikuni, this model VM26606, it's going to come stock with a 190 main jet and a 22.5 pilot. We found that the 15 pretty much works best for the GY6 motors. Whether it's stock, whether it's slightly built, really built, very rarely have I ever seen a pilot jet work well in one of these motors that's bigger than the 15. So as far as increments of 2.5, so as far as sizes go, we have 15, we have 17.5, 20, 22.5, which comes in the carburetor, and then it just kind of goes up from there, 25, 27.5, 30, so on and so forth. So what you're going to want to do as far as changing a pilot jet, so we're going to take this 22.5 out there. So you're going to want a screwdriver that's really small that fits in the hole there, and you just kind of feel around. It's a flathead screw, and it grabs there we go, and just spin it out. There it is. You want to make sure that once you find the groove and you start turning the screwdriver, when you initially break it free, it's going to be everything in those brass. So you want to be careful. The jets are brass, so you don't want to tear up the top of the jet, or you won't be able to get it out in the future. All right, so that's what a pilot jet looks like. It's got your little flute, and then it's got your threads, and that's your groove for your screwdriver. So this hole is very small. If you ever have a non-starting issue, let's say something, it was running or whatnot, usually tends to happen when it sits. But these pilot jets, and it goes with any carburetor, the CVK, the stock carbs, probably 90% of the time this is the main problem. But these jets, these holes are so small that they're just easy. It doesn't take much of a piece of schmutz in there to clog it up. This is your idle jet and your start jet. So I mean, if this is clogged, she's not starting. So what we do is pretend that's the 15, and then you just basically go and reverse what we just did. And then when you get to the bottom and she stops, you don't want to really send it hard. Just got to make sure it's snug and it's going to stay in there. Okay. Pilot jet, best way to remove the pilot jet is the jet itself is 6 millimeter, and the needle jet that it mounts into is 8 millimeter. So the best way to break it, or to break it loose, is put an 8 millimeter jet on the bottom, the larger hex at the bottom, and then take a 6 millimeter. You could even use a 1/4 inch will work. Nut driver or wrench, and then just pop it off. Brand new, like it sits, if I just take a nut driver and just try to remove the jet, the whole needle jet will come out with it. So that first time you break it loose, you're going to want to hold the bottom. Once you do that, changing jets should just be easy. You should just be able to take a nut driver and basically screw it loose. If you notice from the factory, they mark them. So that jet hasn't been removed yet, obviously. So the other thing I want to go through is float level. So if you notice, there's a seam on the float. It looks like a little Z. And basically, so this is right out of the box. And you want to make sure that the straight line on a seam matches the bottom of the carb as far as, being parallel. That's usually the general way to set most floats. Even the stock CVK carb that comes on a GY6, same thing. There's a seam across the carb. They usually have a white float with a seam right across the middle, same thing. As far as setting this, now this is a little different than setting the float on the CVK carb. So to set the float, if it's a little out, these pins with a couple of smacks, you know, just tap it on your hand, this pin will slide right out. There's no retainer on that pin. The retainer is actually the shape of the bowl. So once the bowl's on there, you can see where the pin would be, and it can't really come out. Once you take the bowl off, you slide the pin out, remove the float. Now you don't have to do this to set it, I'm just kind of giving you a tour right now. And then this is your float valve. And the float valve has a tip to it and basically fits inside that channel right there. And when the float, if we put it back together, so the valve goes in, set your float, line it up, take your pin, slide it across. Alright, the float basically pushes that valve down. Okay, so when it's upside down, it's wanting to hang free. Now it's only going to hang as low as the bowl will go. As fuel comes up in the bowl and fills the bowl, it pushes the float up, pushes that valve, and seals off the gas flow. Alright, two things that can happen: A, if your float's not set right, or B, sometimes if you have, you know, from going to the gas station, filling up your gas can, you don't know what's floating around the gas can, then you pour it in the tank, and then it makes its way down to the carb. If it gets inside the bowl, sometimes as it's coming out, because that's where the fuel is coming out of. It's coming out of where that valve is. Sometimes a piece of dirt or schmutz will get lodged in there, and it will not allow the valve to actually seal, and gas will just continue to come through. If that happens, it's basically going to fill up the carb and make its way through these vent tubes, and usually sometimes it will come out the front of the carb and down the intake and down the piston, gas wash the rings, make its way into the crankcase, and just fill it up. And 90% of the time people don't know until they pull their dipstick and it overflows and it smells like gas and it's coming out. That's gas wash motor. So that is what you want to kind of keep an eye out for, so things like that don't happen. If that does happen, what you should do is first off drain all the oil and gas out of it. You know, stop this from flowing, take the carb off, shut the fuel off, whatever you got to do. Drain the oil out with the gas, and then I tend to use, like when I'm flushing a motor, I tend to use Marvel Mystery Oil, which you can buy by the gallon, and I fill it up to the top. I turn it over a bunch of times without the spark plug, let it get mixed in there, and then I'll drain it. I'll do it again with the Marvel Mystery Oil, repeat, drain it. You know, I might even let it sit and recycle with the starter again, and then drain it, and then I'll get a couple quarts of cheap oil, and then probably go through 3 quarts of doing the same process with real oil, which, you know, like a cheap regular 1040. Once that's done, then it starts to look good and clear after the 3rd oil change, I will, you know, put my regular oil back in it and give it a shot. As far as the path of fuel, so the fuel line hooks connects here, and then basically works its way through the carb and comes out where the float valve is. So that's basically a direct link. So you could even test this if you take the bowl off and hook your fuel line to it, turn the fuel on. If you want to test your float to make sure it's closing all the way, you can actually do it. If I hold this like that, no fuel will come out. If I let it drop a little bit, you'll see it to start, you know, it'll start trickling out. You can do that right in your hand without the bowl, just to kind of test it. I'm going to leave this apart. As far as hooking up the cable, take your cap off. You have a spring. Then you have your slide. Alright, just to give you a demonstration. So you take everything out, and you can see the inside of the slide. That's where your cable is going to clip into. Before you just go ahead and do that, you basically, the way you took these pieces off, that's how they have to go on the cable. So you take your cap, you run your cable through the rubber boot, and the rubber boot actually retains the cable on to top of the cap. Alright, so this way it flexes, it kind of grabs on there, it locks into, now there is a brass piece that's got a nut and it's threaded that you can adjust the cable with. I never do it from there, I usually do it from the pedal and the cable adjustment on the cable. Alright, the next thing you're going to want to put is you're going to want to feed your spring in there. Now the cable's not hooked to anything right now, so this is incredibly easy for me right now because I don't have the other end of the cable hooked to anything. So I have all this extra slack that I can use. If it's hooked to the cable, it might be a little tougher because you won't have much to work with, and this is where it's going to get tough. It's just getting this spring down and retained enough that you can get everything together. Next, you're going to put the little lead part right there in the hole and then move it over so it locks in. Alright. This is the retainer plate, and this serves two purposes. It keeps the cable in and also keeps the jet from popping out. And has a little tab. The tab fills the gap where the cable slid in, that little slot right there. So this goes there, and you can actually use the needle to move it around if you need to. Alright, so then you let your spring go. Spring holds that retainer plate down, keeps the needle from popping up because it's under a lot more pressure than you're seeing here, because normally you have about that much when it's hooked to the cable. So I mean, everything's kind of under pressure. Alright, and then this is the most important part when you're placing your slide in there, especially if your buggy does not have neutral. Okay, I got put in the hospital a couple years ago working on someone's at the track, and what they accidentally did was put the slide in the car backwards. If you notice, there's a ramp here. There's a little indent cut into the side of the slide. That's where your pilot jet goes. Then if you notice, there's a slot cut down the hole from top to bottom, the length of the slide, that goes opposite of the pilot jet. If you look inside, alright, on the pilot jet side of the carburetor, you can see the pilot jet, the nipple of the pilot jet sticking out. On this side, you can see that there's like a little nipple or tit sticking out for the that fits in this groove. And this is basically a guide. That thing sticking out basically guides this slide down there and keeps it from spinning. All right. So when you drop it in, the big notch goes to the pilot jet. And when you first stick it in, and then you just feel around for a little bump on the other side, and she slides right down. And then basically screw the cap on. And you want to screw it onto your, it stops and you're out of threads. You don't need to really manhandle it. That's good, it's snug. That's good enough to ride with. Alright. To test that, if you want to test it, what I do is before I put my air filter on and whatnot, because you're going to see there's a little bit of gap there. The slide's curved on the bottom, so there's a little bit of opening. It needs to have that. I usually just stick my finger in there and listen for it to hit. Make sure my cable's not too tight, so when I start it up, she don't take off on me. What had happened to me was we had a guy a couple of years ago. He had a Baja Reaction 250, and I had done some work to it, and it actually in stock form wasn't competitive at all. So we started, I did some clutch work for it, put an exhaust on it, and then put a slide carb on it for it. We were dialing in the jets, so he went out for the first race, and I wasn't really sure where to be with the pilot jet. But I said if he felt like it needed a change, we could change it. So I was showing him how to take the carb off and the jet out and everything. And when he took the carb, I was helping someone else out. I told him to put it back on the way I took it off. And what he had done was take the slide and put it in backwards. So here's my pilot jet. You can see. And then what happens is this. The slide will stop right there. Now, can I get this cap back on and screwed on? Sure, it's possible. Anything's possible. It's only a spring. It's really not that strong a spring. So that's what happens there. And then you go to start it, and you wonder why it's not starting. And then when you choke it or figure it out, she takes off like a bat out of hell. And that's what happened to me. So I had basically, because it was a 250 and the motor was mounted in the front, and we didn't have a passenger seat in it because, you know, we're racing and we're lightening it up, and it's a lot easier to work on the motors without a passenger seat being on it. So it was facing me, and I checked the fuel. I saw fuel in the line. I turned the key, it wouldn't start. And instead of choking or whatever, and it wouldn't have made a difference, I just took my hand and put it over the unit filter and started it up. And she started up wide open. I knew exactly what was going on. I knew exactly what happened. And it was taking off. So I grabbed a hold of the cage and tried to plant my feet. And lo and behold, it dragged me for about 20 feet into someone's camper, the bumper of their camper, and I broke 5 ribs on this side, fractured 4 on the other, lacerated my spleen, smashed a kidney, spent 2.5 weeks in ICU in the middle of COVID. There is another video telling that whole story, but that's what can happen. So you have to be very, very careful, please, when you install your slide. So, because it is possible just to put the cap on, not realize what you did. So you want to make sure that she goes down in there and she's in the right position. All right. Next thing I want to talk about real quick is tuning the air mixture screw. Okay. Your air mixture screw is basically on the idle side, which is going to be on the left side of your buggy. So your intake goes here, your air filter goes here. The way it was explained to me by a friend of mine, a mechanic friend a long time ago, was that when your air mixture screw is up here on the throat of the carburetor, it's adjusting fuel. When it's behind, it's on the back side where the air filter is, you're adjusting the air, okay? So if it's on the front, and usually like your stock CVK carbs, the GY6 carbs, the vacuum carbs, they're up front. Okay, so what you're doing is when you're opening it up, you're letting more fuel in and you're making it richer. When you're screwing it down, you're cutting fuel off and you're making it leaner. Okay, in this case, when you're screwing it in, you're making it richer because you're cutting off the air. And if you're screwing it out, you're letting in more air and you're making it leaner. Okay. This comes into effect mainly about idle to a quarter throttle. All right. If you have a breakup when you're taking off or something, she tends to stumble, you might want to take a look at the screw and see where it's at. Normally they're about 1.5 to 2 turns out at the factory. You know, if you want to check it just to see, you're starting from scratch for a point of reference, take a screwdriver and you turn it in till it stops and you count the turns. Okay. So basically every time the screwdriver goes around, that's a half, it'd be another hole, and then probably you get to another half-ish, it would stop. And that way you can back it out the same amount of turns and you know for your point of reference where you're at. Okay, how many turns in was it? Or how many turns out was it from the factory? While she's idling, you want to go ahead and set the idle to where it's idling. If your idle seems okay but a little rough, like she might be loading up, you take your screwdriver, and usually if it sounds like it's stumbling, that's usually, it's a little on the rich end on the on the idle circuit. And what you can do is just slowly turn the screwdriver out. Okay, and you're letting more air in. And what you're going for, the objective is to get the highest, smoothest idle using this screw to get it adjusted. Once you have, and you'll know, because if you go too far, she'll start stumbling again or go lower. You'll have to go back and forth and find the sweet spot. once you have the highest, smoothest throttle, you just turn your idle screw down to where it should be, and that should be set. You should be good to go. Another misnomer about these things, you know, I get a lot of customers, they install the slide carb, and I tell them how great the throttle response is, and it is. So the first thing they do when they get it installed is, you know, they start it up and whatnot, and they take their foot and they waffle stomp the gas. That's not the way you drive this. This is not. I can make anything stall out if I do that. I have a, you know, even my YFZ, if I stab it with my thumb as hard as I can make it stumble. All right. That's not the throttle response I'm talking about. You're gonna have to learn a little bit of finesse. You drive these a little different. You can waffle stomp a CVK carb. It's got the vacuum lag to it. It's not gonna, you know, it's only as much as the engine vacuum is gonna allow. With this, because it's mechanical, you can flood this thing out if you hit it hard enough. You don't want to stab it. You want to learn to be smooth. But the throttle response, which you're gonna be missing versus, or the advantage of this, and what you're gonna lose off the stock CVK carb, is the vacuum lag. So this is gonna respond a lot quicker, but it doesn't mean that, oh, I can just stick my foot and bam. Now, once you learn the finesse of what it will do, as fast as you can move your foot, she'll respond. But it doesn't mean to just take it and hit it as hard as you can. It just won't work that way. So there is a little bit of, you are going to have to drive this carb a little different, but once you get the hang of it, it's never better. So, and as far as these tubes go, everybody wonders, you know, I get a lot of questions, these vacuum tubes. No, once you install this, you'll eliminate the vacuum. Unless you're running a vacuum petcock. If you're running a vacuum petcock, which I would recommend getting a manual petcock if you order this kit, or if you order a slide carb, and go with manual, let it gravity feed. If you keep the vacuum petcock, then what you're going to do is bypass the carburetor with the vacuum lines and run it right from the petcock to the intake and leave the carburetor out of the loop. So if there's a little Y from the factory that splits the vacuum line to the carb, you'll need to cap that off or just get one vacuum line and run it right from the petcock to the intake. All right, if you can, you know, now my kit comes with a performance carb. If you look in the bag with the jets, there will be a little Allen screw. The Allen screw, it's a little M5 Allen screw, and what you can do is take a 7mm nut driver or wrench and spin out the nipple for the vacuum, and then insert this screw if you'd like. I mean, just to be safe, when I do it here, I put a little liquid Teflon or something on it, or sealer, thread sealer, just to make sure. But you should be able to just screw it down tight and it should be good to go, because that, I don't think most of the intakes that I see don't have a thread sealer on the nipple anyway. So you can eliminate it there, and that way if you have a gravity fed petcock and you can eliminate the intake, now you've just eliminated one more problem, which is engine vacuum, that you won't need to run any components on the machine. Not your carburetor, not your petcock or anything, because if the vacuum goes, or if a diaphragm goes in the carburetor stock or in a vacuum petcock, it's going to leave you stranded somewhere. So that's the other advantage to running the slide carb, is you no longer need to have any vacuum lines or any mess. You know, I'm a minimalist. Anything I can eliminate and make it run as good as I can, I'd like to. So these are vent lines. That's a vent line. That's for the atmosphere vent, and then this is their basically an overflow line. For this is actually acts like an over. If you see fuel coming out here, it's overflowing. But this is just an atmosphere vent, and then this is the drain line for the float bowl. So there are some channels in here. If the flow starts getting up, it'll start leaking out of here. It'll start, if it gets higher yet, it'll start leaking out of here. The goal is to not have it leak out of anywhere. Your 4 screws are all the same length, so you don't have to worry about what screw goes where. And then for this vent line here, they actually give you a little thing in the float that you can pop through and, you know, hold it in place real nice. Another trick is, like on my race buggy, I did not have the room, because of the intake setup I run and everything, that the nipple would hit the mount bolt on the buggy. If you get a brass pair, or if you get a pair of pliers, this fitting here is just a brass insert. It's just pressed in. you get some pliers, you're trying not to rip it, you're trying not to rip it in half. What you're trying to do is, if you do it, slowly and whatnot, you can get some vice grips or whatnot, and you can wiggle it back and forth and slide out and be good. You don't need that. This is not a necessity. It's there, but if fitment is a problem, you can go ahead and remove it. It won't hurt anything. It won't make a difference anywhere. It's just if you need the room, you can get the room, and that's one way to get the room. The carburetor itself is fairly compact. Doesn't really take much more space than your CVK carb. In fact, I think it actually takes up less space. Where you might run into some issues are with the crossbar, because of the performance intakes are a little higher up. So that's when we get into, you can search the channel I have on putting hoops in your swing arms and whatnot. If you need to, they will fit in most instances, but you might need to either change the stack tube, or even the performance carb boot. Now I use I'm sorry, I'm bad. Silicone. I use silicone, like turbo hoses. I get them to size. I use 1 3/8. You can order them anywhere, Amazon or whatever. I cut them to length. When I send a performance motor out, that's the boot that I make my own, cut my own, and use that. It lasts longer than a rubber boot. I've seen rubber boots break and whatnot, and it's an easier fit. The stock intake boots on most performance intakes, they have little grooves and whatnot. They would fit the CV carb all right, but this lip on this carburetor is just a little fatter. Instead of trying to hack that off, it's just easier to use a different boot or whatnot. It will snap on, but it is a handful, and it's a tight fit. Using a 1 3/8 silicone hose is just a lot easier, and it's flexible, and it withstands the fuel a lot better. I forget the measurement, but I actually have some turbo hose that fits the stack in case there's circumstances where either customer can't get their stuff to fit, and if they contact me, I'll cut them a piece and send it so they can actually, if they need to, spread the distance or whatnot to get onto the bar, and the boot that the stack comes with won't cut it, then this is a more flexible piece that they can work with. So that's it. That's the basics, VM26606 basics or whatnot. Hopefully that gives you some insight if you order the kit. I installed, I think it was end of 2009 or about 2010 probably, because I think I bought the Euro from 2009 in September. But this was probably the biggest performance gainer I had ever done, without doing any engine work. And I can't even imagine trying to run a built engine on anything but a slide carb, especially this one. As far as reliability, you can't beat it. I have a video that I posted a couple weeks ago. Pulled the buggy out of the trailer for the first time in months, probably since July, and I think we rolled it in like late February, early March. It had battery juice. I put a splash of gas in the tank. I had gas in the tank. I parked it with fuel in the tank. It probably just evaporated. Race fuel tends to do that. But that's fuel sitting in the bowl for months and this and that, and she fired right up. So reliability, 10 out of 10 compared to the CVK carb, no doubt. So that's all the basics. Parts are available for these. If you don't see them on the website, contact me one way or the other via email, messenger, on Facebook, or whatever. WPS, where I get the carbs from, Western Power Sports, they carry every part for these carbs. So if you happen to do something to the float ball, if you need a needle, a slide, a spring, whatever, if you get in contact with me, I can get you the parts for them. So that's the other nice thing, other than trying to buy like a slide carb off Amazon or whatever, because then you just have to buy a whole new carb. But these things, are they a little pricier than an Amazon carb? Sure, they should be. Mikuni's been around for years and years and years. They are like one of the mainstays in power sports as far as dirt bikes and ATVs are concerned. So, but it's a lot nicer piece than you'll ever find on Amazon, buying something from China or like a Chinese copy. So anyway, that's it for now. If you need any parts, go to gotbuggies.com. If you have any questions or comments or whatnot, you can leave them in the comment section. We appreciate all you've done for us as far as the channel just keeps on growing, which is kind of cool. And you know, if you haven't already, subscribe, and if you like what you see, hit the like button. If you have any suggestions, you can leave them in the comment section also, as far as subjects to make videos on. So that's it for now. Appreciate everything. JD's out.